So you're in the middle of a campaign right now. When do the ballots go out?
Yeah, the ballots go out July 3rd, and the primary day is July 30th. And I don't think there's ever been a time in which there's been a clearer choice, not only in our primary, as the previous candidates ran before, but this district is now a swing district. Greg Stanton has been a rubber stamp for the Biden administration, and that rubber stamp includes horrific economic policies, a hemorrhaging border, an immigration policy that's destroying our country, the inflationary economy. Just families have had it with the crime, the fentanyl, the intervention in their choices for schools, and so many things that you've talked about so much on your program, foreign policy. And, it's sort of been a culmination of my work to run for Congress. A lot of my vetting that I've had nationally, encountering the radical Islamists and standing up for medical freedom, for patients' choice during the pandemic. One of the few docs nationally that really took on the medical establishment. So it became really natural for me to put my hat in the ring and feel that I could leave a legacy that our country has been missing so far in the very radicalized politics of the far left.
Well, it certainly has. How's the campaign going so far?
Oh, it is amazing. The support has just been amazing and the grassroots. We have made a lot of headway in the debates that we've had. People have seen a clear choice of someone who's been a lifetime conservative, but also I can tell you my practice. I have been a primary care doc for so many thousands of families here in the district, and families come away. I've got supporters from all types of political spectrums, from the left to the right, that say, listen, we want somebody we can trust, somebody that not only talks the talk, but walks the walk. So, I think that I can bring, and this is seen in my endorsements. We've been endorsed from Charlie Kirk and Brandon Tatum all the way to Senator Kyle, Governor Brewer, Hugh Hewitt, Glenn Beck, and so many of your colleagues that have been endorsing my campaign nationally and locally, with Sal DeCiccio and other state leaders that have clearly said, I can be part of that bridge, not only across the partisan divide, but also within a community that I learned from my parents, that America first is a principle why they came here, but also that the traditional conservative mindset carries the values of what Americans believe in.
Well, you were gracious enough to come and be a guest on a show that we had entitled Campus Chaos, A Dangerous Agenda. And I was talking about college campuses across the country, including our most elite institutions, Harvard, Yale, Columbia, MIT, Penn State, what we consider our Ivy League top drawer universities, with protests led by these pro-Hamas student organizations. And what I knew at the time, and I think it's been proven to be true, outside agitators. It had become more and more apparent than ever that there's just a growing hate movement, not only for Jews and the state of Israel, but the West in general, America, our culture, our principles. We had a really in-depth conversation about all of that and why these prominent institutions had gone so haywire. I felt like clearly they weren't teaching critical thinking, or you wouldn't have been hearing and seeing what we were hearing and seeing. How did we get so far off track, Doctor?
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked that final question, because this was not something that happened by spontaneous combustion overnight. As we just finished Father's Day yesterday, and my wife and I have three beautiful, blessed children that are 22, 20, and 16. They're in university age, or getting there, or finishing. And I can tell you that these institutions have been corrupted over a generation. And after 9/11, as a doctor, I said, listen, terrorism is a symptom. The disease is radicalization. The disease is a faith identity that has been co-opted with national identity, has not gone through a Western Enlightenment process, secularization, that separation of church and state, and ultimately created the greatest country on the planet, which was anti-theocracy, but pro-God, under God. So not anti-religion, but pro-freedom, pro-religious liberty as our first freedom. The institutions that I'm fighting against, the theocracies of Iran, the Muslim Brotherhood, Pakistan's Islamic Republic, all of the Sharia Islamic states have not gone through that enlightenment. Similarly, in the universities, As I've testified to Congress multiple times, the radicalization of Muslims should be a telltale for what's happening across our universities and the radicalization of the left with the what we call the red-green axis. That axis that you see in the UN, where you have Iran working with the Venezuelas and Chinas of the world, with a common enemy against the West, with the little Satan being Israel, the great Satan being America, and thus they demonize us, they gaslight the West so that they can move their ideas into our institutions. And you see every institution affected by this anti-Americanism, this colonialist, anti-colonialist mentality that somehow we have to apologize for our history. We have to apologize for everything. We get gaslit into submission, and thus it becomes fueled by anti-Semitism. And you saw this in the Black Lives Matter movement, where they went city to city, destroying our institutions, espousing, Black Lives Matter was led by the Nation of Islam folks that were the most virulent anti-Semites of Louis Farrakhan and others. So this marriage has been going on for a long time between the world's far left extremist communist parties, the Marxists, and the Islamists.
But here's the thing, and talk to me like I'm 16 years old, I guess. Maybe it's my naivety. I understand the difference between the left and the right here, and I understand both sides wanting to push their agenda, but we're all Americans. And when we're getting attacked from the outside, when we've got people that are coming in and literally attacking our country on American soil, like with 9/11, they're trying to undermine our young people. The ideology that they're pushing is so clearly anti-American, anti-Semitic, anti-American. What's happened to our leadership that we don't recognize that we are under ideological attack? We were under physical attack at 9/11. We're under ideological attack now. You would think that when this becomes so blatant that people would say, hey, this is a good time to recognize we're all Americans. How are they subverting this so much?
It's very simple, actually, Dr. Phil. And I've talked about this to our Muslim kids that, when we try and so often, it's whether you're working against drug use or whether you're working against terrorism and violence and gangs, you can't just tell them, well, that's bad, don't do it. They have to have something to fill that void in their heart. So the reason I was never radicalized was because the only thing I would ever die for is America. That's why I joined the Navy. That's why I served 11 years as a naval officer. And I continued to head towards the fire, where after 9/11, we formed our foundation, because I felt that I had God-given blessings from living in this country, that my parents escaped a military dictatorship and came here and taught me that I could practice my version, my interpretation of Islam more freely here than in any Muslim majority country. So with that narrative, it was a sense that the only thing that gave me freedom was my constitution and my government and the people of this country that protected those rights. So what happens with all of these institutions is that they're not teaching what's good about America. They're not giving their students, our youth, a purpose in which it can fill the void of anti-Americanism and all of the hate, because that void gets filled with just a sense of entitlement, a victimization. And the left feeds on identity politics. So whether it's the UN and Iran and China, or at Congress with Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and AOC, they share a common animus for this country, even though they're supposedly representing our constituents here. And that's the problem, is that we need to reawaken and renew. That's why my campaign is about renewing America's promise, about calling for leadership within our families, the erosion of the family, the parental leadership that has been stolen by government through DEI programs, through critical race theory, that's just destroying the foundations of Western success.
Well, I guess the campuses and the faculties have just been hijacked by so many left-leaning liberal professors that they're in this bubble and they're pushing this ideology. It's so offensive to me that they might be doing a course on, art history or kinesiology, for God's sakes, but they're actually taking a captive audience and pushing their political agenda. And that's not what they were there for. It's not what they were hired for. If I had a child sent to that university and we were paying the tuition and all of that, and they were pushing this kind of political agenda on my student, I would not be happy about it. That's not what they went there for. That's not what they were there to get pushed.
And Dr. Phil, we got here because America was a meritocracy. I'm going to give you two quick examples. Number one, I'm a medical officer. I was a medical officer in the Navy, graduated on a Navy scholarship from a private medical school in Wisconsin, Medical College of Wisconsin. And I learned that you get rewarded if you are the best in your rounding ship, in your medical science, in the art, and in the bedside care. We just saw a study out of UCLA that showed that doctors graduating today have some of the worst competencies they've had in 2 generations. And that study should just frighten everybody, because this is what happens on the heels of DEI. It's no longer about meritocracy. It becomes about mediocrity and really just checking off boxes. Even our Supreme Court said that affirmative action was unconstitutional and un-American. The second is I serve on a board of an organization that looks at what's happening in our military academies. And STARS, as it's called, looks at the officer ranks and what they're being taught. Our own military academies now are recruiting in the wrong areas. They're no longer getting our best and brightest. And I learned as the son of immigrants, Dr. Phil, and this is why I'm running, that my grandfather taught me the special sauce in America is our military, that ultimately they take orders from a civilian government, and it is the most honorable thing in America to serve in our military. The militaries in the Middle East are the most corrupt mafioso type organizations that are kleptocratic, that are truly the deep state. And if we don't look at what's happening in our military today, where it's no longer a meritocracy, where it's no longer about our best and brightest wanting to serve and really just about checking off boxes, and they can't even use the word terrorism anymore because it might offend Muslims there, which is just, I find offensive, a bigotry of low expectations. And this is what's happening in the 2 major institutions that I've been involved in, which are medicine and military.